Grendel, a close read literary analysis.
That a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. It harrowed him to hear the din of the loud banquet every day in the hall, the harp being struck, and the clear song of a skilled poet, telling with mastery of man's beginnings, how the Almighty had made the earth, a gleaming plain girdled with waters. In his splendor, he set the sun and the moon to be earth's lamplight, lanterns for men, and filled the broad lap of the world with branches and leaves, and quickened life in every other thing that moved. So times were pleasant for the people there, until finally one, a fiend out of hell, began to work his evil in the world. Grendel was the name of this grim demon, haunting the marches, marauding round the heath and the desolate fens. He had dwelt for a time in misery among the banished monsters, Cain's clan, whom the Creator had outlawed and condemned as outcasts. For the killing of Abel, the Eternal Lord had exacted a price. Cain got no good from committing that murder, because the Almighty made him anathema. And out of the curse of his exile, there sprang ogres and elves and evil phantoms, and the giants too, who strove with God time and again, until he gave them their reward.
Analyze characteristics of an epic poem. Annotate. Highlight words and phrases in lines 14 through 29 that give clues about one of this epic poem's universal themes. And analyze. What is the universal theme described by these lines? All right, lines 14 through 29. First is a quote, "Times were pleasant for the people there." I think this clues the reader into a period of peace and prosperity. It sets a contrast with the looming evil. Quote, "Until finally one, a fiend out of hell." This quote introduces an element of darkness or evil. It's characterized as a fiend out of hell and suggests a supernatural force that's disrupting the peace. Quote, "Began to work his evil in the world." That indicates that there's a beginning to the conflict, where evil starts to manifest actively. Quote, "Grendel was the name of this grim demon." This quote names the specific embodiment of evil, Grendel, linking the character directly to the concept of malevolence and terror. Quote, "Haunting the marches, marauding round the heath." That implies a continuous movement and restlessness. It suggests a relentless, ever-present danger. Quote, "And the desolate fens, he had dwelt for a time in misery among the banished monsters." This describes Grendel's association with desolation and misery. It emphasizes his outcast status and inner torment. Quote, "Cain's clan, whom the Creator had outlawed and condemned as outcasts." So this ties Grendel to the biblical story of Cain that evokes themes of sin, exile, and divine punishment. Quote, "For the killing of Abel, the Eternal Lord had exacted a price. Cain got no good from committing that murder." This quote reinforces the theme of divine justice and the consequences of sin. It draws a parallel between the punishment of Cain and the existence of Grendel. Quote, "Because the Almighty made him anathema." So this suggests a curse, a state of being accursed or detested by God, and it adds a religious dimension to the conflict. Quote, "Out of the curse of his exile there sprang ogres and elves and evil phantoms and the giants too who strove with God." Now that highlights the proliferation of evil from a single act. It suggests that sin and wrongdoing bred further chaos and malevolence. Quote, "Until he gave them their reward." This quote implies that there's an eventual divine retribution, underscoring a belief in justice and moral order. So when we analyze this idea of a universal theme, that's suggested by these lines basically is the eternal struggle between good and evil. The passage that we looked at establishes a duality where peace, harmony, and divine creation are set against the chaos, malevolence, and darkness embodied by Grendel. This conflict is not just a physical one, but it's also moral and spiritual. It highlights humanity's ongoing battle against the forces that threaten to disrupt the balance established by a higher power. Moreover, the text suggests a theme of divine justice and retribution. Grendel's lineage, tracing back to Cain, serves as a reminder that wrongdoing carries consequences not only for the individual, but for their descendants and the world at large. This echoes the idea that evil deeds lead to suffering, and that divine justice will ultimately prevail. It also emphasizes the importance of moral order and the need for heroes, like Beowulf, to rise against such darkness to restore peace and balance.
So, after nightfall, Grendel set out for the lofty house to see how the Ringdanes were settling into it after their drink. And there he came upon them, a company of the best asleep from their feasting, insensible to pain and human sorrow. Suddenly then, the god-cursed brute was creating havoc. Greedy and grim, he grabbed 30 men from their resting places and rushed to his lair, flushed up and inflamed from the raid, blundering back with the butchered corpses. Then, as dawn brightened and the day broke, Grendel's powers of destruction were plain. Their wassail was over. They wept to heaven and mourned under mourning. Their mighty prince, the storied leader, sat stricken and helpless, humiliated by the loss of his guard, bewildered and stunned, staring aghast at the demon's trail, in deep distress. He was numb with grief, but got no respite, for one night later, merciless Grendel struck again with more gruesome murders. Malignant by nature, he never showed remorse. It was easy then to meet with a man shifting himself to a safer distance, to bed in the bothies, for who could be blind to the evidence of his eyes, the obviousness of that hall watcher's hate? Whoever escaped kept a weather eye open and moved away.
Then as dawn brightened and the day broke, Grendel's powers of destruction were plain. Their wassail was over. They wept to heaven and mourned under mourning.
It's fun to hear this poem read aloud. That's my first thought.
Yeah, the double alliteration in the first line here is great. The way those D's and B's repeat in the two phrases, and then the P sounds in the next line.
And then come W's. Their wassail was over. They wept to heaven. It's almost cheerful and sing-songy, like a nursery rhyme. Like Mary had a little lamb, but it's not a cheerful scene.
It's the opposite. The previous stanza described how Beowulf and his men were passed out from all their drinking. That's what wassail refers to here, a celebration with lots of drinking. And then Grendel came in and went on a murderous rampage. Now the survivors are just waking up and realizing what's happened.
So they're seeing his powers of destruction, probably their dead comrades, and they're upset, understandably. They're weeping to heaven.
Are they literally calling out to God? There were references to the Almighty earlier in the poem. Or is it a figure of speech, meaning they're crying loudly enough to be heard from far away?
Either meaning makes sense. These guys sure have a reason to cry. It says they mourned under mourning. There's that wordplay again, using words that sound so similar.
It's interesting that mourning is a grieving process, but it's linked to morning, the early part of the day. Usually that's associated with hope and rebirth.
If this is a rebirth, it's into a very depressing world. Listen to this. Their mighty prince, the storied leader, sat stricken and helpless, humiliated by the loss of his guard, bewildered and stunned, staring aghast at the demon's trail. In deep distress, he was numb with grief, but got no respite. For one night later, merciless Grendel struck again with more gruesome murders.
Here comes the alliteration again. The storied leader sat stricken.
That's a strong word, stricken. It must make his men feel even worse to see their powerful leader brought down so low. He's described as being helpless, humiliated.
Yeah, the translator really emphasizes how devastated he is. Bewildered, stunned, aghast, in distress.
In these lines, the sound devices emphasize the gravity of the scene.
Right, the rhythm accentuates the words stunned and aghast. The alliteration in the Demon's Trail, in deep distress, sort of digs into me.
If I were sitting around a fire, listening to someone recite this poem, I'd be on the edge of my seat. It's like watching a horror movie where things just keep getting worse. Like, one night later, merciless Grendel struck again with more gruesome murders. It just won't stop.
I wonder if they're going to keep feeling stunned and numb, or whether they're going to move into action.
So Grendel ruled in defiance of right, one against all, until the greatest house in the world stood empty, a deserted wallstead. For 12 winters, seasons of woe, the Lord of the Shieldings suffered under his load of sorrow. And so, before long, the news was known over the whole world. Sad lays were sung about the beset king, the vicious raids and ravages of Grendel, his long and unrelenting feud. Nothing but war. How he would never parley or make peace with any Dane, nor stop his death-dealing, nor pay the death price. No counselor could ever expect fair reparation from those rabid hands. All were endangered. Young and old were hunted down by that dark death shadow, who lurked and swooped in the long nights on the misty moors. Nobody knows where these reavers from hell roam on their errands.
Analyze Old English poetry. Annotate. Kennings are often more descriptive than simple nouns. Highlight the kenning in line 75. And how does that kenning help readers visualize Grendel? The kenning is death shadow. It's a compound metaphor typical of Old English poetry. That kenning replaces a simple noun, such as monster or killer, with a more evocative phrase. The kenning death shadow helps readers visualize Grendel in a more vivid and imaginative way than just a straightforward noun would. It suggests that Grendel is not just a physical being, but also an embodiment of death itself, moving like a shadow that brings darkness and demise wherever it goes. The term shadow implies stealth and the ability to move unnoticed, evoking fear of an unseen threat that could strike without warning. The association with death adds to the sense of dread, painting Grendel as a grim, inescapable force that lurks in the darkness, hunting the Danes. This kenning effectively captures Grendel's malevolent nature and his role as a bringer of destruction. It highlights his supernatural qualities and his connection to death and darkness. So by using a kenning, the poet provides a more evocative image and engages the reader's imagination and amplifies the horror of Grendel's presence.
So Grendel waged his lonely war, inflicting constant cruelties on the people, atrocious hurt. He took over Heorot, haunted the glittering hall after dark, but the throne itself, the treasure seat, he was kept from approaching. He was the Lord's outcast. These were hard times, heartbreaking for the Prince of the Shieldings. Powerful counselors, the highest in the land, would lend advice, plotting how best the bold defenders might resist and beat off sudden attacks. Sometimes, at pagan shrines, they vowed offerings to idols, swore oaths that the killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. That was their way, their heathenish hope. Deep in their hearts, they remembered hell. The Almighty Judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high King of the world, was unknown to them. Oh, cursed is he who in time of trouble has to thrust his soul in the fire's embrace forfeiting help. He has nowhere to turn, but blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. So that troubled time continued, woe that never stopped, steady affliction for Halfdana's son, too hard an ordeal. There was panic after dark. People endured raids in the night, riven by the terror.
Beowulf. A close read analysis.
Beowulf. When he heard about Grendel, Hygelac's Thane was on home ground, over in Geatland. There was no one else like him alive. In his day, he was the mightiest man on earth, high-born and powerful. He ordered a boat that would ply the waves. He announced his plan to sail the Swan's Road and search out that king, the famous prince who needed defenders. Nobody tried to keep him from going. No elder denied him, dear as he was to them. Instead, they inspected omens and spurred his ambition to go, whilst he moved about like the leader he was, enlisting men, the best he could find. With 14 others, the warrior boarded the boat as captain, a canny pilot along coast and currents.
Analyze characteristics of an epic poem. Annotate. Highlight words and phrases in lines 109 to 124 that characterize Beowulf as a hero. Infer. What is the hero's motivation to go on this quest? There was no one else like him alive. This phrase establishes Beowulf's uniqueness and exceptional status among men, highlighting his distinctiveness as a hero. In his day, he was the mightiest man on earth. This description emphasizes Beowulf's unparalleled strength and power, a key characteristic of a heroic figure. High-born and powerful. The term high-born indicates Beowulf's noble lineage, while powerful underlines his physical strength and authority, both traits that contribute to his heroic stature. He ordered a boat that would ply the waves. This shows Beowulf's decisiveness and leadership as he takes action and makes arrangements for the journey, demonstrating his initiative and courage. He announced his plan to sail the Swan's Road and search out that king, the famous prince who needed defenders. Beowulf openly declares his intention to face the challenge, reflecting his bravery and willingness to help those in need. Nobody tried to keep him from going. No elder denied him, dear as he was to them. The respect and support he receives from his people, including the elders, indicate their trust in his abilities and their recognition of his heroism. They inspected omens and spurred his ambition to go. This suggests that even the community and its spiritual leaders believe in his success and divine favor, reinforcing his status as a chosen hero. He moved about like the leader he was, enlisting men the best he could find. This highlights his qualities as a leader, taking charge and selecting only the most capable warriors to accompany him. The warrior boarded the boat as captain, a canny pilot along coast and currents. Describes Beowulf not only as a warrior, but also as a skilled and wise leader, canny pilot, who can navigate challenges, enhancing his heroism. Beowulf's motivation to go on this quest appears to be driven by several factors. desire for glory and fame. As indicated by his determination to be the one to face Grendel, Beowulf seeks to prove himself as a mightiest man alive, pursuing glory and recognition through heroic deeds. A sense of duty and honor. Beowulf feels a strong sense of obligation to help Hrothgar, the famous prince who needed defenders. His noble lineage and warrior code likely instill in him a sense of responsibility to protect and defend those in need. Recognition and support from his people. His people, including the elders, support his decision and see him as a leader, motivating him further to embark on the quest and succeed. Leadership and challenge. His actions demonstrate his leadership qualities and his willingness to face formidable challenges, driven by a heroic desire to confront and defeat a fearsome foe like Grendel.
At the door of the hall, Wulfgar duly delivered the message. My lord, the conquering king of the Danes, bids me announce that he knows your ancestry. Also, that he welcomes you here to Heorot, and salutes your arrival from across the sea. You are free now to move forward, to meet Hrothgar, in helmets and armor. But shields must stay here, and spears be stacked until the outcome of the audience is clear. The hero arose, surrounded closely by his powerful thanes. A party remained under orders to keep watch on the arms. The rest proceeded, led by their prince, under Heorot's roof. And standing on the hearth in webbed links that the smith had woven, the fine forged mesh of his gleaming mail shirt, resolute in his helmet, Beowulf spoke.
Language conventions. Annotate. Highlight the words or phrases in lines 131 to 141 describing Beowulf. Analyze. What mood is created by the poet's word choice? The hero arose. This phrase directly refers to Beowulf as the hero, immediately reinforcing his status and central role in the narrative. Surrounded closely by his powerful thanes. This phrase indicates Beowulf's leadership and his command over his loyal followers, who were described as powerful, underscoring the strength of his company. A party remained under orders to keep watch on the arms. Reflects Beowulf's strategic thinking and preparedness, as he ensures that some of his men remain to guard their weapons. The rest proceeded, led by their prince. Beowulf is referred to as their prince, which emphasizes his nobility, leadership, and the respect his men have for him. Under Heorot's roof. This phrase indicates the setting and suggests the beginning of an important encounter or audience with Hrothgar. Standing on the hearth in webbed links that the smith had woven. Describes Beowulf's appearance, highlighting his webbed links, chainmail, created by a skilled smith, which suggests his readiness for battle and his warrior status. The fine forged mesh of his gleaming mail shirt. The phrase emphasizes the quality, fine forged, and appearance, gleaming, of Beowulf's armor, further depicting him as a prepared and formidable warrior. Resolute in his helmet. The word resolute characterizes Beowulf's determined and unwavering attitude, while in his helmet reflects his readiness for whatever may come. The poet's choice of words creates a mood of anticipation and tension mixed with admiration. The use of terms like hero, powerful thanes, and led by their prince elevates Beowulf's status, presenting him as a noble and heroic figure who commands respect and loyalty. The description of his armor, webbed links, fine forged mesh, and gleaming mail shirt contributes to a sense of admiration and awe, emphasizing his preparedness for battle and the impending meeting with Hrothgar. Additionally, words like resolute convey a mood of determination and readiness, hinting at an impending confrontation or significant event. The mood is one of seriousness and expectation, as Beowulf prepares to meet Hrothgar and possibly face whatever challenges await him.
Greetings to Hrothgar. I am Higelakh's kinsman, one of his hall troop. When I was younger, I had great triumphs. Then news of Grendel, hard to ignore, reached me at home. Sailors brought stories of the plight you suffer in this legendary hall, how it lies deserted, empty and useless once the evening light hides itself under heaven's dome. So every elder and experienced councilman among my people supported my resolve to come here to you, King Hrothgar, because all knew of my awesome strength. They had seen me boltered in the blood of enemies when I battled and bound 5 beasts, raided a troll nest, and in the night sea slaughtered sea brutes. I have suffered extremes and avenged the Geats. Their enemies brought it upon themselves. I devastated them. Now I mean to be a match for Grendel, settle the outcome in single combat. And so, my request, O King of bright Danes, dear Prince of the Shieldings, friend of the people and their ring of defense, my one request is that you won't refuse me, who have come this far, the privilege of purifying Heorot. With my own men to help me, and nobody else. I have heard, moreover, that the monster scorns in his reckless way to use weapons. Therefore, to heighten Higelakh's fame and gladden his heart, I hereby renounce sword and the shelter of the broad shield, the heavy warboard. Hand to hand is how it will be, a life and death fight with the fiend. Whichever one death fells must deem it a just judgment by God. If Grendel wins, it will be a gruesome day. He will glut himself on the Geats in the war hall, swoop without fear on that flower of manhood as on others before. Then my face won't be there to be covered in death. He will carry me away as he goes to ground gorged and bloodied. He will run gloating with my raw corpse and feed on it alone in a cruel frenzy, fouling his moor nest. No need, then, to lament for long or lay out my body. If the battle takes me, send back my mail shirt, this breast-webbing that Wayland fashioned and Hrethel gave me, to Lord Higelac. Fate goes ever as fate must. Hrothgar, the helmet of shielding, spoke. Beowulf, my friend, you have traveled here to favor us with help and to fight for us. There was a feud one time, begun by your father. With his own hands, he had killed Hitholaf, who was a wolfing. So war was looming, and his people, in fear of it, forced him to leave. He came away then, over rolling waves to the South Danes here, the sons of honor. I was then in the first flush of kingship, establishing my sway over all the rich strongholds of this heroic land. Haregar, my older brother, and the better man, also a son of Halfdanas, had died. Finally, I healed the feud by paying. I shipped a treasure trove to the Wolfings, and Ecgtheow acknowledged me with oaths of allegiance.
Memory moment. Notice and note. Highlight the words or phrases in lines 191 to 207, highlighting the history between Hrothgar and Beowulf. Infer. What can you infer from Hrothgar sharing the story of the relationship between himself and the poem's hero? There was a feud one time, begun by your father. This indicates a past conflict involving Beowulf's father, establishing a historical connection between Beowulf's family and Hrothgar. With his own hands he had killed Beowulf, who was a woofing. This phrase provides specific details about the feud, mentioning that Beowulf's father killed a man named Beowulf from the woofing tribe. So war was looming, and his people, in fear of it, forced him to leave. Describes the consequences of the feud and why Beowulf's father had to flee his homeland to avoid the impending war. He came away then over rolling waves to the South Danes here, the Sons of Honor. Explains that Beowulf's father sought refuge with the South Danes, Hrothgar's people, showing a direct connection to Hrothgar's kingdom. I was then in the first flush of kingship, establishing my sway over all the rich strongholds of this heroic land. Hrothgar recalls his early days as king, providing context for when Beowulf's father arrived seeking his help. Hrothgar, my older brother and the better man, also a son of Halfdanus, had died. Mentions Hrothgar's brother, Hrothgar, adding more background to the royal family dynamics at the time. Finally, I healed the feud by paying. I shipped a treasure trove to the woofings. Hrothgar reveals that he resolved the conflict by paying reparations to the woofings, showing his role as a peacemaker. Ecgtheow acknowledged me with oaths of allegiance. Beowulf's father, Ecgtheow, pledged loyalty to Hrothgar in return for his help, establishing a bond between their families. From Hrothgar's sharing of the story, we can infer several key points about the relationship between him and Beowulf. A debt of honor and gratitude. Hrothgar's actions in resolving the feud for Beowulf's father, Ecgtheow, created a bond of loyalty and obligation between their families. By recounting this story, Hrothgar is reminding Beowulf of this past debt, suggesting that Beowulf's arrival to help with Grendel is seen as a fulfillment of this familial duty. Mutual respect and recognition. Hrothgar's willingness to recount the story and welcome Beowulf shows a mutual respect between them. It also indicates that Hrothgar views Beowulf's arrival as an honorable gesture that acknowledges their shared history. Acknowledgement of Beowulf's lineage and reputation. Hrothgar's words highlight the importance of lineage and reputation in their culture. By emphasizing Beowulf's father's actions and the resulting alliance, he acknowledges Beowulf's noble background and inherent qualities as a warrior. Building trust and solidarity. By sharing this personal story, Hrothgar aims to strengthen the bond and trust between himself and Beowulf. He establishes a connection based on past loyalty and service, which may encourage solidarity and cooperation in the battle against Grendel. A strategic reminder. Hrothgar's recounting may also serve as a subtle reminder to Beowulf of the history and expectations tied to their relationship. It underscores the sense of duty Beowulf has in aiding Hrothgar, given the past favor done for his father, thereby reinforcing Beowulf's motivation to prove himself worthy and uphold his family's honor.
It bothers me to have to burden anyone with all the grief Grendel has caused, and the havoc he has wreaked upon us in Heorot. Our humiliations, my household guard, are on the wane. Fate sweeps them away into Grendel's clutches. But God can easily halt these raids and harrowing attacks. Time and again, when the goblets passed and seasoned fighters got flushed with beer, they would pledge themselves to protect Heorot and wait for Grendel with whetted swords. But when dawn broke and day crept in, over each empty, blood-spattered bench, the floor of the mead hall where they had feasted would be slick with slaughter. And so they died, faithful retainers, and my following dwindled. Now take your place at the table. Relish the triumph of heroes to your heart's content. Then a bench was cleared in that banquet hall, so the Geats could have room to be together, and the party sat, proud in their bearing, strong and stalwart. An attendant stood by with a decorated pitcher, pouring bright helpings of mead, and the minstrel sang, filling Heorot with his head-clearing voice, gladdening that great rally of Geats and Danes.
The Battle with Grendel, a close read analysis.
The Battle with Grendel. In off the moors, down through the mist-bands, God-cursed Grendel came greedily loping. The bane of the race of men roamed forth, hunting for a prey in the high hall. Under the cloud-murk, he moved towards it, until it shone above him, a sheer keep of fortified gold. Nor was that the first time he had scouted the grounds of Hrothgar's dwelling, although never in his life, before or since, did he find harder fortune or hall defenders. Spurned and joyless, he journeyed on ahead and arrived at the bawn. The iron-braced door turned on its hinge when his hands touched it. Then his rage boiled over. He ripped open the mouth of the building, maddening for blood, pacing the length of the patterned floor with his loathsome tread, while a baleful light, flame more than light, flared from his eyes.
Analyze characteristics of an epic poem. Annotate. Highlight the words or phrases in lines 245 to 251 that illustrate Grendel's power. Compare. How does Grendel's power compare to what you've read about Beowulf's abilities? Quote, the iron-braced door turned on its hinge when his hands touched it. This phrase suggests that the mere touch of Grendel's hands is enough to make the iron-braced door move, indicating his immense strength and ability to manipulate heavy, fortified objects effortlessly. Quote, his rage boiled over. He ripped open the mouth of the building. Ripped open emphasizes Grendel's incredible physical strength, showing that he can tear apart a solid structure with his bare hands. His rage boiled over suggests uncontrollable fury, adding to his ferocious and violent power. Quote, maddening for blood, pacing the length of the patterned floor with his loathsome tread. Maddening for blood indicates Grendel's insatiable desire for violence and killing. His loathsome tread implies a powerful, intimidating presence as he moves through the hall. Quote, "A baleful light, flame more than light, flared from his eyes." Baleful light and flame more than light evoke an image of Grendel's eyes emitting a supernatural and terrifying glow, suggesting a sinister, otherworldly power that goes beyond mere physical strength. How does Grendel's power compare to Beowulf's abilities? Grendel's power. Grendel is characterized by a combination of physical strength, supernatural attributes, and malevolence. His ability to rip open an iron-braced door and his maddening for blood behavior depict him as an unstoppable force driven by fury and bloodlust. The baleful light flaring from his eyes suggests a menacing, almost demonic presence, making him a terrifying and fearsome adversary. Grendel's power is chaotic, driven by rage and a desire to kill. His strength is destructive, and he embodies a force of evil that thrives on fear and violence. Beowulf's abilities. Beowulf, in contrast, is portrayed as a noble and heroic figure with unmatched physical strength and courage. His strength is demonstrated through his past feats, such as battling sea monsters, defeating trolls, and his willingness to confront Grendel without weapons, relying solely on his hands. Unlike Grendel's chaotic and destructive force, Beowulf's power is controlled, disciplined, and used in service of others.
He saw many men in the mansion, sleeping, a ranked company of kinsmen and warriors quartered together, and his glee was demonic, picturing the mayhem. Before morning, he would rip life from limb and devour them, feed on their flesh. But his fate that night was due to change. His days of ravening had come to an end. Mighty and canny, Hygelac kinsman was keenly watching for the first move the monster would make. Nor did the creature keep him waiting, but struck suddenly and started in. He grabbed and mauled a man on his bench, bit into his bone lappings, bolted down his blood, and gorged on him in lumps, leaving the body utterly lifeless, eaten up hand and foot. Venturing closer, his talon was raised to attack Beowulf, where he lay on the bed. He was bearing in with open claw when the alert hero's comeback and arm lock forestalled him utterly. The captain of evil discovered himself in a hand grip harder than anything he had ever encountered in any man on the face of the earth. Every bone in his body quailed and recoiled, but he could not escape. He was desperate to flee to his den and hide with the devil's litter, for in all his days he had never been clamped or cornered like this. Then Hygelac's trusty retainer recalled his bedtime speech, sprang to his feet, and got a firm hold. Fingers were bursting, the monster backtracking, the man overpowering.
Analyze Old English poetry. Annotate. Poets often use a caesura to create a dramatic pause. Highlight the caesuras in lines 283 to 284. Analyze. Which alliterative words carry the stresses in these two lines? How does a poet use caesuras in these lines to enhance the story? A caesura is a deliberate pause or break within a line of poetry, often used to create a rhythmic effect or emphasize particular words or phrases. In Old English poetry, caesuras are typically found in the middle of a line, separating the two halves of the verse. Quote, his bedtime speech sprang to his feet. The comma indicates a caesura, creating a dramatic pause between his bedtime speech and sprang to his feet. Quote, bedtime speech, sprang. The stressed alliterative words are speech and sprang. The repetition of the initial S sound creates a strong emphasis on Beowulf's sudden action. Quote, and got a firm hold. Fingers were bursting. The period acts as a caesura here, causing a pause before continuing with fingers were bursting. Quote, firm hold, fingers. Firm and fingers carry the alliteration and stress, focusing on Beowulf's powerful grip. Quote, the monster backtracking, the man overpowering. The comma indicates another caesura, separating the monster backtracking from the man overpowering. Quote, monster backtracking, man overpowering. The stressed alliterative words are monster and man, both beginning with M. This emphasizes the struggle between the two characters, highlighting the clash of strength and power.
The dread of the land was desperate to escape, to take a roundabout road and flee to his lair in the fens. The latching power in his fingers weakened. It was the worst trip the terrormonger had taken to Heorot. And now the timbers trembled and sang, a hall session that harrowed every Dane inside the stockade. Stumbling in fury, the two contenders crashed through the building. The hall clattered and hammered, but somehow survived the onslaught and kept standing. It was handsomely structured, a sturdy frame braced with the best of blacksmith's work, inside and out. The story goes that as the pair struggled, mead benches were smashed and sprung off the floor, gold fittings and all. Before then, no shielding elder would believe there was any power or person upon earth capable of wrecking their horn-rigged hall, unless the burning embrace of a fire engulfed it in flame. Then an extraordinary wail arose, and bewildering fear came over the Danes. Everyone felt it who heard that cry as it echoed off the wall. A god-cursed scream and strain of catastrophe, the howl of the loser, the lament of the hell-serf keening his wound. He was overwhelmed, manacled tight by the man who of all men was foremost and strongest in the days of this life. But the Earl Troop's leader was not inclined to allow his caller to depart alive. He did not consider that life of much account to anyone anywhere. Time and again, Beowulf's warriors worked to defend their lord's life, laying about them as best they could with their ancestral blades. Stalwart in action, they kept striking out on every side, seeking to cut straight to the soul. When they joined the struggle, there was something they could not have known at the time. That no blade on earth, no blacksmith's art, could ever damage their demon opponent. He had conjured the harm from the cutting edge of every weapon. But his going away out of this world and the days of his life would be agony to him, and his alien spirit would travel far into fiends' keeping.
Analyze characteristics of an epic poem. Annotate. Highlight words and phrases in lines 318 to 331 that tell why Beowulf's companion warriors could not defeat Grendel. Analyze. What characteristic of an epic poem does this typify? Quote, there was something they could not have known at the time. This implies that the warriors were unaware of an important fact about Grendel. Quote, no blade on earth, no blacksmith's art could ever damage their demon opponent. This reveals that no weapon, no matter how skillfully made, could harm Grendel because of his supernatural protection. Quote, he had conjured the harm from the cutting edge of every weapon. This explains that Grendel had cast a spell or a curse that rendered him immune to the weapons of men. How does this passage exemplify a characteristic of an epic poem? Supernatural elements and powers. The description of Grendel's invulnerability to weapons due to a magical or supernatural protection, quote, he had conjured the harm from the cutting edge of every weapon, is a common trait in epic poetry. It reflects the presence of supernatural forces that influence the events and characters in the story, highlighting the epic struggle between human heroes and other worldly foes.
Then he who had harrowed the hearts of men with pain and affliction in former times, and had given offense also to God, found that his bodily powers failed him. Heolach's kinsman kept him helplessly locked in a handgrip. As long as either lived, he was hateful to the other. The monster's whole body was in pain. A tremendous wound appeared on his shoulder, sinews split, and the bone lappings burst. Beowulf was granted the glory of winning. Grendel was driven under the fen banks, fatally hurt, to his desolate lair. His days were numbered. The end of his life was coming over him.
Analyze Old English poetry. Annotate. Poets often use alliteration to create rhythm, emphasis, and mood. Highlight the alliteration in lines 340 to 345. Infer. How does a poet's use of alliteration enhance the description of Grendel's wounds? Quote, sinews split. The repetition of the S sound creates a sharp, harsh effect, emphasizing the tearing and breaking of Grendel's body. Quote, bone lappings burst. The repeated B sound highlights the forceful and violent nature of Grendel's wounds, conveying a sense of power and destruction. Third, quote, Grendel was driven. The alliteration of the D sound emphasizes Grendel's forced retreat, suggesting urgency and defeat. Quote, fatally hurt to his desolate lair. The F and D sounds contribute to the somber and bleak tone, enhancing the mood of Grendel's suffering and impending death. The poet's use of alliteration in these lines serves several purposes. First, it creates rhythm and emphasis. The repeated consonant sounds create a rhythmic flow that mimics the action and intensity of the scene. The S and sinews split and bone lappings burst mirrors the physical ripping and breaking of Grendel's body, while the harsh B sounds emphasize the violent nature of the injuries. The rhythm draws the reader's attention to the severity and impact of the wounds. Second, it enhances the imagery. The alliteration makes the description of Grendel's wounds more vivid and memorable. Words like split, burst, and driven create strong visual images of Grendel's suffering and defeat. This use of sound and repetition adds to the reader's experience by appealing to the auditory sense, making the scene more dramatic and engaging. Third, it sets the mood and tone. The harsh, consonant-heavy alliteration contributes to a mood of violence, pain, and finality. The repetitive sounds underscore the brutal reality of Grendel's defeat and evoke a sense of grim satisfaction in Beowulf's victory. This creates a tone that is both triumphant for Beowulf and tragic for Grendel, reinforcing the themes of battle and mortality present in the poem. Overall, the poet's use of alliteration intensifies the description of Grendel's wounds, amplifying the drama and emotion of the moment, while contributing to the poem's overall rhythmic and stylistic qualities.
Knew it for certain, and one bloody clash had fulfilled the dearest wishes of the Danes. The man who had lately landed among them, proud and sure, had purged the hall, kept it from harm. He was happy with his night work and the courage he had shown. The Geat captain had boldly fulfilled his boast to the Danes. He had healed and relieved a huge distress, unremitting humiliations. the hard fate they'd been forced to undergo. No small affliction. Clear proof of this could be seen in the hand the hero displayed high up near the roof. The whole of Grendel's shoulder and arm, his awesome grasp. Then morning came, and many a warrior gathered, as I've heard, around the gift hall, clan chiefs flocking from far and near, down wide-ranging roads, wondering greatly at the monster's footprints. His fatal departure was regretted by no one who witnessed his trail. The ignominious marks of his flight, where he'd skulked away, exhausted in spirit and beaten in battle, bloodying the path, hauling his doom to the demon's mere. The bloodshot water wallowed and surged. There were loathsome upthrows and overturnings of waves and gore and wound slurry. With his death upon him, he had dived deep into his marsh den, drowned out his life and his heathen soul. Hell claimed him there. Then away they rode, the old retainers with many a young man following after, a troop on horseback, in high spirits on their bay steeds. Beowulf's doings were praised over and over again. Nowhere, they said, north or south, between the two seas, or under the tall sky on the broad earth, was there anyone better to raise a shield or to rule a kingdom. Yet there was no laying of blame on their lord, the noble Hrothgar. He was a good king. At times the warband broke into a gallop, letting their chestnut horses race wherever they found the going good on those well-known tracks. Meanwhile, a thane of the king's household, a carrier of tales, a traditional singer, deeply schooled in the lore of the past, linked a new theme to a strict meter. The man started to recite with skill, rehearsing Beowulf's triumphs and feats in well-fashioned lines, entwining his words.